why indeed.
Oi! Where do you think you're going, young man?
The Olympics.
You better take this, put your medals in.
Thanks, Mum.
The Winter Olympics start up on February 9th, and the hype couldn't be higher. As tension simmers around the world, one actually relieving de-escalation has been the negotiations between North and South Korea in advance of the games in PyeongChang. But that doesn't mean that some other twists and turns aren't in store. So let's look back at some of the top Olympic scandals in the history of the Games. Rebagliati's performance-enhancing drugs.
I tested positive for cannabis in the '98 Olympics in Nagano.
Back in 1998, snowboarder Rebagliati became the first ever to win an Olympic gold medal for men's snowboarding. However, that medal was stripped from him after his drug test returned and showed that he had marijuana in his system, with a small amount of weed also found in his travel bag. In a completely out-of-character move for the IOC, the move was overturned and he got his medal back. Because the active agent in marijuana, THC, wasn't on the list of banned substances for the Olympics, it did make sense for the IOC to overturn their decision. But it has been argued both then and since that the calming effects of THC can really help chill nerves before big events like, maybe the Olympics. That could have given the Canadian snowboarder an unfair advantage.
Cannabis is definitely a performance enhancer.
But regardless of where you stand on the matter, it turned out to be a great career move for Rebagliati, who became an instant celebrity and marijuana businessman.
Pain doesn't need to rule your life. Take it back.
We've got what you need.
Figure skating judge does the impossible. Back during the scandal-plagued 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, people who follow figure skating were enraged when the reigning world champions Jamie Salé and David Peltier ended up, quote, winning a silver medal, despite the fact that they'd skated a perfect routine. Beyond that, considering that the Russians were the team that supposedly beat them and ended up with gold, people rightfully smelled a rat.
David, what was your first thought when the numbers went up?
It was like a punch in the stomach.
The day after the event, when the outrage only seemed to be growing, French judge Marie-Reine Legoin said that she'd voted for the Russians the way that she did because she felt pressure from the French Skating Federation. In a move that we may never see again, Salé and Peltier were awarded the gold in addition to the Russian figure skaters. You'd have to think that there was a little more to it than this, especially considering that it was the Russians that benefited. Angel Matos kicks a ref. If you're a fan of any sport, there's undoubtedly been a moment in your life when you found yourself standing in front of the television screaming at the ref. Imagine that feeling times a million or so as an athlete who's trained his or her whole life only to feel like you've been treated poorly by the person there who's supposed to remain as objective and neutral as possible, the referee or umpire. That tension apparently boiled over for one athlete, Cuban Taekwondo athlete Angel Matos, who was disqualified after he fell and took too much time over the allotted 1 minute designated for medical attention. After being disqualified, he walked over to the referee and kicked him in the face, a move that could have easily killed him. For this, Matos was banned from the World Taekwondo Federation for life, which means that he can't coach or participate in anything that's officially sanctioned for the rest of his life.
Conor McGregor going after the ref.
This might seem like an awful penalty for a split-second decision, but again, considering that he could have killed that ref, it might have been too lenient. The Badminton Scandal.
I was so good that some years later, the Army decided that I should be on the All-America Ping Pong team.
One of the most popular sports, or at least one where the Chinese especially dominate, is badminton. While it might seem to you like a backyard game for children, matches at this level in the Olympics, they're totally drama-filled and pulse-poundingly thrilling. The players seem to move at an increased speed that seems almost too fast for human beings. The stakes are clearly incredibly high, and because of that, no stone is left unturned by the players or coaches for each country. Back in 2012, multiple teams realized that because of the way seeding worked in the build-up toward the medal games, you could essentially benefit from losing a game here or there. By doing so, the teams thought they'd end up playing a weaker opponent in the next round, and so multiple teams ended up losing on purpose. Those teams from China, Indonesia, and 2 from South Korea were disqualified from the games for throwing their matches, and while there's probably a rule against throwing a game, it doesn't seem like they were really doing anything illegal by losing. Sure, it's bad sportsmanship, and that's something the Olympics want nothing to do with, but when it comes to the Olympics, athletes will always find any and all advantages possible. In this case, it seems like they were a little too smart for their own good. Jim Thorpe's pro career.
Two-time Olympic gold medalist and the world's greatest athlete.
After the 1912 Olympic Games, Jim Thorpe was dubbed the greatest athlete in the world by the King of Sweden, King Gustav V.
Thorpe replied, "Thanks, King."
While the wishy-washiness of that title makes it something that you can't really take away, you can take away one's medals under a number of circumstances. One of those circumstances is based on the idea that the Olympics are supposed to be games for amateur athletes, even if pro athletes are more and more becoming a part of the games for both summer and winter. This was the case back in 1912, where Thorpe won 2 gold medals in the pentathlon and decathlon. It was discovered after the fact, though, mostly thanks to Thorpe's newfound celebrity, that he'd actually been a professional baseball player for teams in Fayetteville and Rocky Mount, North Carolina. While he did die without that order being rescinded, he was posthumously re-awarded his medals in 1982, after the then president of the U.S. Olympic Committee ended up pleading his case to the IOC. He leaned on a letter that Thorpe had written to the Olympic officials back in 1913 that admitted wrongdoing and regret, and because of that, and the increase in professional athletes in the games nowadays, Thorpe is now and forever considered an Olympic champion. The Salt Lake Bribe.
In 2002, to the city of Salt Lake City.
It's been debated more and more in recent years whether or not actually hosting the Olympics is boon or bust for the city that lands the games. While it might seem invaluable to host tens of thousands of people over the course of a month from all over the world in your city, the cost of hosting those people, especially with the cost of keeping those people safe from terrorism, only seems to increase with every passing year.
We think the Olympics will go very nicely, and after that, who knows? We'll find out. We're going to find out pretty soon.
Beyond that, very few cities can actually handle the amount of sports going on at once, and thus end up building countless structures to handle all the games. And after the games are over, those structures can end up abandoned and blighted. Despite that, though, the process of landing the Olympics is still something that's extremely competitive, and that can lend itself to issues like bribery, something that happened when 2 head organizers of the 2002 games in Salt Lake City were indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit bribery.
Mr. Welch's and Mr. Johnson's direct payments to IOC members and their relatives.
The men were accused of paying $1 million to influence the votes of delegates on the IOC, as well as a U.S. Olympic Committee official, in the hopes that they would be able to land the games for SLC. Apparently it worked, and by the time this was all found out, it was way too late to relocate the games. So instead, they appointed a famous Utahn who you might have heard of.
I'm very good company.
Former presidential candidate Mitt Romney, and they brought him in to lead the Olympic Committee in Salt Lake City and to bring credibility to the games there. If you add the bribery costs to the cost of hosting the games as a whole, maybe it's just not worth it after all, especially if you consider some time spent in federal prison. Marion Jones Steroid Scandal.
I pled guilty to 2 counts of making false statements to federal agents.
Outside of the Russian doping ban, the most recent scandal on this list is the lifetime ban of U.S. sprinter Marion Jones thanks to her own doping issues. Jones actually owned up to her doping though, which makes her case different from a lot on this list, as a bunch of people just don't own up to their mistakes. Think of like Ben Johnson, for example, and instead they just ride out their excuses until the end of time. Jones was America's sweetheart for a while, and maybe owning her mistakes, she's hoping that she can get back in the good graces of the sport, at least to make a living at it as a coach or trainer, which could happen as she did win 5 medals during the 2000 games in Sydney, Australia. Because her case involved a federal investigation though, Jones ended up with criminal charges and actual prison time. She received 6 months in prison followed by 2 years probation for lying to federal prosecutors who were investigating her use of steroids. And beyond that, she was, again, banned for life from Olympic competition.
And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me.
This was one of the more amazing falls from grace the Olympics have ever seen. But beyond her fault was the fault of her husband as well, who's also linked in the scandal as a shot putter. The Balco scandal, as it was known at the time, also tarnished the careers of baseball greats Barry Bonds and Jason Giambi, and was probably the biggest scandal in sports ever. Ben Johnson's doping scandal.
I win a gold medal and I lost it, so
That's life.
In 1988, the Summer Olympics were held in the South Korean capital of Seoul. It was there that American Carl Lewis was heavily favored to win the 100-meter dash. However, Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson shocked not only Lewis, but the entire world while running the 100-meter in 9.79 seconds, which was a world record that easily beat Lewis's time. Because of the amount of time it took to receive the results of a drug screen back then, it wasn't known until days later that Johnson actually tested positive for a type of steroid called stanozolol. Because of the time delay, while Johnson's gold did end up going to Lewis, Lewis was still robbed of his moment on the podium. Ever since then, Johnson has still found a way to make it all about him, saying to this day that he can't watch the Olympics anymore because of what happened to him. Not because of what he did, but because of what happened to him.
June 13th.
The confession got harder today for Ben Johnson. He couldn't contain the tears.
The Russian doping scandal.
Russia is banned from participating in the 2018 Winter Olympics.
It's hard to really pinpoint when the Russian doping scandal began, as it's been an open secret for years that the Russians have attempted to circumvent the rules for the games really since the USSR was in power. And things like a country winning more gold medals or reaching the moon quicker or something like that were super important to the world's two leading superpowers. If you go to Wikipedia, you'll see that doping in Russia has essentially a year-by-year breakdown, which just goes to show that doping in this country is a state-backed enterprise that goes well beyond the individual coaches or athletes in any particular games. The Olympic Committee investigated the most recent Winter Olympics, which, took place in Sochi, Russia, as well as the 2016 Games in Rio, and found that because the doping was so widespread and complex that it had to be sponsored by the government of Russia itself. Because of that, Russia will not even be allowed to compete in this month's games.
The Russian Olympic Committee is suspended with immediate effect.
Which is a gigantic punishment that could seem unfair to the athletes that have trained their whole lives to participate in a month's worth of games. However, if an athlete has no connection to the previous doping scandal and can pass drug screens, they are allowed to participate under the Olympic flag as opposed to the Russian flag. They'd be classified as an Olympic athlete from Russia, or OAR, and the fact that the Olympic Committee has gone this far shows just how serious they are about cracking down on doping and just how corrupt the Russian regime is about it.
You have to be really, really strong inside and believe in yourself.
Nancy Kerrigan versus Tonya Harding.
Hi. How are you?
As the recent award-winning film I, Tonya showed, there was no bigger scandal or story in 1994, the year of the games in Lillehammer, Norway.
It's not gonna hold me.
And that of Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. The two were the top two female figure skaters in the United States, and depending on who you asked and when you asked them, at one point they were friends, or at least frenemies. What's in question is not even what Harding knew, but rather when she knew it. As on January 6, 1994, Kerrigan was attacked after leaving the ice for a practice session before the 1994 Figure Skating Championships in Detroit. She was hit in the knee by a club-like instrument by a man named Shane Stant, who was in cahoots with Harding's ex-husband Jeff Gillooly and her bodyguard Sean Eckhart. They claimed that they had hired Stant to break Kerrigan's right leg, so Harding would have a clear path to the Olympic Games, while Harding claimed that she knew nothing of the attack before it happened, but that she did find out about it afterwards, and that she helped cover it up. The investigation wasn't conclusive enough to ban Harding from skating in the Olympics, however, where she famously wept to the judges about her laces being broken, and thus finished without a medal.
In a situation like this, the referee, the judging panel will give her every opportunity to put out her best performance.
Kerrigan, however, ended up being just fine and almost won the gold medal as she finished with silver and the story of a lifetime. There's no scandal in hitting that subscribe button and clicking that notification bell. There might even be an iPhone X in it for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the games.